And we're 1 minute to, so Sarah, I will mute myself and leave it to you.
Great, thank you. I will just give it one more minute before I start, just in case folks are still getting into the session.
And folks, if you need to turn up the volume of your speakers to hear Sarah better, I think Sarah speaks a little more quietly than I do. If you look at the bottom of your screen to the right of audio help, you will see volume sliders. If you mouse over them, you can turn up your speaker volume if that's more comfortable for you. Thank you.
Great, and I have checked in terms of my microphone, and I'm pretty much right at the top. So please do let us know in the text chat if you are having difficulty hearing me. But I will be starting in just a second. So welcome everyone to Learning Challenges Part 1, What Are They for Literacy and Employment Practitioners? My name is Sarah Gill and I'll be your facilitator for both parts of this series. The second part of this series will take place on October the 6th and will focus on strategy development. So this is the first session of the 2016-2017 Online Community of Practice webinar series. The Online Community of Practice is in its second year. Last year, Contact North took the lead. This year, it's organized by a committee of the Learning Networks of Ontario and is being headed up by Literacy Link South Central, and of course supported by Contact North. So I'm very thankful and pleased to have Sarah Stalker with us today from Contact North to provide technical support. So thank you, Sarah. Everyone will be muted throughout the session, as Sarah had mentioned, so that we're not affected by background noise. But if you do have a question, please type it into the text chat. So both Sarah and I will be looking regularly to see if there are any comments to share or questions to respond to. And we can also give you the microphone, as Sarah had mentioned, so that you can add a comment or ask a question. In this case, you click on the raised hand button so we know that you're interested in speaking. And so you'll be given your mic at that point. And you can press and hold the control button or click the mic button at that point. The session is being recorded so that we can share it with you for future playback or reference, or you may have colleagues that are interested in hearing the recording. There's also 3 documents that we're going to be looking at in this session that are outside of the slide deck. So either in digital or hard copy format, they will be shown on screen, certainly the first 2 anyway. So, and they will be available as handouts here. If you click on them, you can download them directly from the session, and they'll also be included in the follow-up email that you'll be getting from Sarah later on today, as well as the evaluation link. The slide deck will also be provided in PDF form, so not to worry, you'll have access to all of the different content pieces that we're going to talk about this morning. In terms of the handouts, you'll see them as they pop up in the agenda, and they are the Learning Challenges Characteristics Checklist, the Learning Challenges Pre-Screen, and then the third document that we won't be looking on screen, is the Processing Challenges, Definitions, and Markers. We're going to be tackling that within the content of the slides, but the downloadable document is handy for future reference. So in terms of introductions, I would first like you to answer a quick poll to identify kind of where you're coming from, whether it's literacy and basic skills, employment services, Ontario Works, or another community partner. And I believe that it is here. So if you wouldn't mind just identifying where you're coming from, that would be great. Okay, I do see that there are a few of you that are identifying where you're coming from in the text chat. If you would also please submit your information to the poll. But it looks like the majority of participants are coming from the literacy and basic skills field, although we do have some representation from employment services as well as additional community partners. So I do welcome you, and I will try to make sure that some of the content is, of course, not some, most of the content is completely relevant to you and your work with your clients. If you do have questions, best practices, experiences that you can share with us through the text chat from your side of the fence, that would be wonderful because it just provides us with more context and how we might work better together. So I am going to introduce myself a little bit, and I encourage you to share in the text chat what you're hoping to learn from this training, as we have 2 sessions together for the most part, if you are registered for the second session as well. If there are things that I don't touch on today that you would like to learn more about, I can try to address them next week. I am the Executive Director of the Adult Basic Education Association, which is the learning network in Hamilton. I've been with the network for 14 years, and in those years I was primarily an academic assessor and lead trainer before I took on the ED role. I completed my undergrad at Guelph University, where I studied English and Family and Child Studies. After working for a few years, I completed my Master's of Education through Brock University, where I really focus on adults with learning challenges. I'm certainly not an expert in learning disabilities by any means. As an assessor, I just felt I needed to be able to give people more information that I could around their learning difficulties. So I set out to just read all there was to read and really kind of took it on as more of a specialty. So my goal was to develop a comprehensive assessment that identified literacy levels as well as processing challenges and strategies that might be useful in the classroom and beyond. So through my grad work as well as some project work through ABEA, I developed a learning challenges assessment tool for adult literacy learners in '05. It's since undergone several revisions and has quite recently been updated to correspond to the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework and Essential Skills. The learning challenges pre-screen that we'll be discussing today is one piece of that assessment, but at this point the assessment is really just available in its entirety through practitioners that are working at the networks. So I'm just going to look and make sure that there aren't any comments that to address in terms of the text chat. Keep them coming, please. If you do have certain things that you would like to touch on that are sparked by things that we're talking about through the session, please put them there, and that will kind of direct me a little bit for next week. So here's the participation aspect of this webinar. I am looking for a volunteer to go through a small sensitivity exercise with me. Are there any volunteers that would be willing to take the microphone and give this a shot? I'm looking for a raised hand. Anyone? Allison. So I'm wondering if we can give Allison her mic. Here we go. So Allison, what I'm asking you to do is just to read the following passage from the story Little Red Riding Hood for me. It is only a few sentences.
Okay, let me just close my little box again. Little Red Riding Hood. Once pond term dare worsted ladle gull ho lift wetter murder in her ladle cordage. Disc ladle gull worry putty ladle rat cluck wetter ladle rat hat and fur disc raisin pimple colder rattle rat rotten hut. Wan moaning ladle rat rotten hut's murder colder inset. Ladle rat rotten hut, hearsay ladle basking, winsome burden batter, and sugar cockle.
Thank you so much, Allison. Well done. So this says, once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived with her mother in a little cottage. This little girl wore a little red cloak with her little red hat, and for this reason people called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood's mother called her inside. Little Red Riding Hood, here is a little basket with some bread and butter and sugar cookies. So I wonder, Allison, you still have access to your microphone. I'm wondering to, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you could just provide a few comments about how that made you feel.
It felt like a tongue twister for sure. I had to really focus on the letters, the pronunciation, but I had no idea what I was talking about.
Thank you for that, Allison. This is a short but powerful exercise to really help us appreciate how someone with a learning challenge has likely felt for most of their lives in and out of the classroom. So as we discuss learning challenges further, these feelings and experiences help us to begin to understand the frustration that our learners and clients may be dealing with. It makes it all the more important to provide individualized and sensitive interventions to help them reach their goals. Um, and this really is just kind of a small exercise to help us try to see what those struggles and frustrations and that sense of maybe insecurity or even embarrassment at looking at something that we would certainly take for granted. So I thank you for doing that with me, Allison.
You're welcome.
So just quickly in terms, oh, I'm sorry. I think
Oh, I
Allison,
just
did
said
you have
you.
another comment?
No, I just wanted to say you're welcome.
Okay, great. Okay, so just very briefly, in terms of the objectives for this session, is that we're hoping that you'll have a better understanding of the types of learning challenges and the markers for each of those challenges. The ability to utilize the pre-screen with your learners and clients is the primary focus in terms of the product of this webinar, and an increased awareness of how learning challenges present themselves. In terms of our agenda, we're going to be looking at some definitions, learning disabilities, learning challenges. We're going to be looking at characteristics. We're going to be looking at the pre-screen, and then also kind of dissecting those learning challenge areas and looking at examples and specific markers, and then following that up with just some final factors to consider. So the the definition of learning disabilities is that they refer to a variety of disorders that affect the acquisition, retention, understanding, organization, and or use of verbal and or nonverbal information. So what does that mean? Well, learning disabilities are commonly evident when there's an unexpected underachievement, considering age, intelligence, and education in one or more areas of learning. So they're typically quite specific. So people with learning disabilities, like everyone else, are very individual. So people will have very specific challenges in some areas and strengths in others. In contrast, developmental disabilities, or also known as intellectual disabilities, are really more of a lifelong condition, so are learning disabilities, but they're manifested at birth or shortly after, where people grow and develop more slowly than others because of limitations in intellectual functioning. So the major difference between a learning disability and a developmental disability is that challenges related to learning disabilities are quite specific. So people with LDs can still function highly in other parts of their life, whereas people with developmental disabilities have global intellectual challenges. So they typically need to be supported through daily activities and very rarely live independently. So although it's possible for people with developmental disabilities to have learning disabilities, of course, the tools discussed throughout this training are not really designed for use with those learners. Learning disabilities can affect language, so speaking and listening essentially, reading, writing, and math skills, memory, reasoning, coordination, so fine and gross motor skills, communication, organizational skills, and also social skills. So the commonly known learning disabilities, so these are the actual diagnosed terminology. Dyslexia is a reading disability. Dysgraphia is a writing disability. Dyscalculia is math. And there's also nonverbal learning disabilities. So characteristics of nonverbal learning disabilities include visual spatial weaknesses, gross and fine motor issues, difficulty organizing, difficulty with time and space, and social and emotional issues. Learning disabilities, oh, excuse me, there we go. Can affect an individual or will affect an individual throughout their life. They express themselves differently over time and circumstances and can be mild to severe. So, how they present themselves will be different when they're in school than on the job. So, this is because the skills used are often managed in different ways. In school, oftentimes students are asked to follow a prescribed set of steps to reach the final answer. Where at work, the focus may be more on problem solving their own way to achieve the same result. So, although issues can certainly still persist, those with learning challenges typically report that they can find coping mechanisms to complete work tasks. And I'm just wondering if anyone has examples of this that you can share about your learners or clients.
Sarah, perhaps we can watch for Daniela's comments or anyone else's comments in the text chat. I noticed Daniela doesn't have access to a microphone, so unfortunately we wouldn't be able to hear her voice them. Thank you.
Great. So I will continue, but as we go through the discussion, if you do have comments about specific things or interactions that you've had with your clients, I do encourage you to share them. So, learning disabilities are congenital and are due to neurobiological factors. So, a person is born with a learning disability. They're not caused by cultural or linguistic differences, poor instruction, socioeconomic status, or lack of motivation. However, these factors, of course, can compound the effects of a learning disability. And certainly across both formal education and into when they participate in the labor force. Learning disabilities often present themselves in groups. So, a writing disability typically is combined with a reading or math disability and exists with other conditions quite regularly, such as attention difficulties, behavioral or emotional disorders, lots of mental health conditions, specifically depression, anxiety. Those types of things quite frequently, not necessarily a causal relationship, but statistically, they can present themselves in groups like that. Learning disabilities can, of course, affect success in school, at work, in daily life. They can also affect friendships and self esteem. So, in terms of friendships, they may have difficulty with things like turn taking, appear as if they're not listening, or have difficulty maintaining a topic. In terms of self esteem, they may have these feelings of inferiority, embarrassment, shame. They may feel helpless or hopeless. As a practitioner, issues of self-esteem can be incredibly detrimental to assisting clients and learners. You may feel like you're fighting an uphill battle sometimes, that you're a cheerleader as opposed to an instructor or employment counselor. So I invite you to share some of those anecdotes in the text chat, examples of those feelings of hopelessness, and certainly any words of wisdom or best practices that you've used can be really helpful to others that maybe have been in a similar situation. People with learning disabilities can feel very isolated and insecure. They may feel like they're the only one that's experiencing these types of frustrations. And they are quite regularly frustrated, angry, resentful of past educational experiences. They're, of course, at risk for limited employment options because of their literacy difficulties and the social stigma for people who don't necessarily fit in. So, oftentimes, people with learning challenges have very negative feelings associated with school. They may feel that no educational environment is going to help or meet their needs. And so you may have experienced this. Um, in terms of employment, the social issues or soft skills can certainly affect employment opportunities. And we hear this from employers again and again that soft skills are so important to keep and or to get and keep a job. I think Roxanne may have a comment.
Roxanne, if you click the microphone icon to the left of your name, with your mouse. You can use it to speak to us, or you can hold the control key on your keyboard if you'd like to go ahead and make a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Actually, I don't have a comment or a question. My computer, for some silly reason, is acting up, and I'm pretty sure there's a virus in it, so I'm sorry about
No problem. Thank you. So over to you, Sarah.
Okay, sorry to hear that. Hopefully we'll have her back on and working in no time. So just moving on in terms of the discussion around the definitions and characteristics. So many adults with learning disabilities do have strengths in very high level thinking, such as reasoning, imagination, seeing the big picture, having original ideas, resilience, the ability to adapt, and persistence. So they've had years of developing coping strategies, and that makes them divergent thinkers in many ways. So looking at some statistics, we know that between 5 and 10% of Canadians have a learning disability. So more than 500,000 adults in this country live with a learning disability, making it, of course, more challenging for them to learn in all types of learning environments, certainly in post-secondary and on the job. This continues to be a very important issue for literacy and basic skills programs. The stats are likely much higher in literacy and basic skills because learners were unsuccessful the first time around and probably feel like they didn't get the support that they needed to be successful in school. Today, we're going to be using the definition of learning challenges because when we're in the adult literacy environment, only a psychometrist or psychologist can diagnose learning disabilities. So we want to use something that's more inclusive and that's a workable definition for us. So learning challenges is intended to mean specific learning challenges, both academic and personal social, which are likely due to processing difficulties, how people process language, which require very individualized strategy and accommodation development. This term emphasizes the idea that through the use of appropriate strategies and accommodations, learners and clients are better able to cope with their difficulties to reach their goals. So as literacy and employment practitioners, this is a more positive description. It does speak to people's unique abilities, coping skills, and resiliency. It's important to remember that most people have characteristics of learning challenges, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a learning disability. And a person may also have many learning challenges as well as other disabilities, as we've talked about. So everyone has different challenges and needs, and the main point here is that they need to be dealt with or worked with individually. So I am curious, when working with your learners or clients, have there been markers or things that you've seen that make you think that they could have learning challenges? So I do invite you to put those types of things in the text chat. What are the common things that make you kind of wonder about and whether or not there are things that maybe need to be looked at?
And Sarah, just wanted to note that Carol gave a very good comment about her experience recognizing the emotional cost of learning disabilities for those who are suffering them, the stress that's associated with trying to be normal.
Absolutely. And I think that that is mirrored with all sorts of other life barriers that may kind of coexist with those things. How many of us have worked with clients or learners that are dealing with a massive amount of life stress that, of course, will compound kind of any learning stress and the comment that you made, of course. I also see here difficulty focusing, ability to understand verbal communication with difficulty reading, of course. Found that there is some behavioral issues as the person is trying to learn. Yes, that those frustrations, the sense of kind of hopelessness, reading ability, and Reading in a halting manner, yes, absolutely. So you may have asked clients or learners to read out loud. That's something that causes people a lot of stress. Easily frustrated, understanding one day and then not remembering the next day. On and off days are very typical for people with learning challenges. Thank you so much for those comments. Those resonate certainly with the experiences that I've had. A hard time doing two things at once, such as taking notes while listening. Yes, multitasking can uh, interestingly enough, be someone's strength, and may certainly in the case of someone that has attention difficulties, they may need to do multiple things at a time. But you're right, sometimes it's very difficult to multitask when you have a learning challenge. Absolutely. Thank you, Terry, for this comment. Fear can be a major barrier. And so fear can keep them from coming in our doors. And so if they do come in the door, then we need to make sure that we create an environment of support and encouragement because it probably took a lot of bravery to then re enter a situation that they may have experienced negative feelings about before. So thank you so much for those comments. So we are going to look at the Learning Challenges Characteristics page. It is available to you as a handout. And we'll, as we discuss the characteristics, either mentally or if you're able to print it out quickly, check off any that you have seen in your learners or clients. So there is the handout if you want to open that, and Sarah is going to put it up on screen for us. Thank you so much. So these are some general characteristics, and then we get into some specific in terms of the reading, writing, and math skills. So we've covered off some of these already, but this is an interesting resource to kind of keep it topical for yourself, something that you can keep at your desk to keep these major characteristics in the forefront of your mind. So someone with learning challenges has strength areas in some areas, but great weaknesses in others. And this is really important, specifically when we talk about the pre-screen, because it's the disparity between the strengths and weaknesses that sets these folks apart. So all of us in this webinar today have strengths in some areas and challenges in others. But when you have learning challenges, the span between those two things is almost insurmountable. They perform similar tasks differently from day to day, that was mentioned, has a short attention span, is impulsive or distractible, learn something one day but can't remember it the next day, so referencing those on and off days. So repetition is very much key. Misinterprets directions or instructions is a big one. Has difficulty following a schedule or being on time, organizing, following directions. Difficulty thinking in a logical manner, kind of step by step. May take everything you say literally, so watch for that. May misinterpret social cues, which can certainly impact folks in the employment side around interviewing and those first couple weeks on the job, and oftentimes has difficulties with direction. So specifically around reading, writing, and math skills, may read well but doesn't write well. So that's interesting but common. Has difficulty keeping their place when reading, following columns, or following small print, specifically if it's only one spacing as opposed to maybe in large spacing. Has difficulty sounding out words or understanding what they're reading. So maybe their phonics is good. Maybe they can decode words really well, but the comprehension of their reading is maybe lacking. Has difficulty writing ideas on paper, but is able to express themselves orally. Persistent problems in spelling is very, very common. Often misreads or miscopies information. Has persistent problems with mechanical things when they're writing, and confuses similar letters or numbers, reverses them, or confuses their order. So those are things certainly that are quite common across people with auditory and visual challenges that we'll be talking about. But it does kind of create this general kind of characteristic list that you can keep in your mind as you're working with clients. There's also a comment from Roger, lack of proofreading and reviewing work that has been done, or that they're looking at their work and are not sure where the errors are. So thank you for that. And then Jean says, that there is also a fear of success as well as failure for some individuals. I think that can resonate absolutely with the work that I have certainly some communication that I've had with learners and clients over the years is that jumping in again and wondering if it's just going to be the same old thing and not really wanting to feel that way again. So thank you so much. Keep those comments coming, please. If you have questions about any of those characteristics, please let us know. I do want to take you very briefly to a short video. It's called Robin's Story, and we're just going to be watching this for about a minute or so. And Sarah, if you wouldn't mind taking me to that.
May I just jump in for a second, Sarah?
Mhm.
Are there Mac users here with us this morning? If so, could you click the green check mark? Okay, we have a few. Do know that for Mac users, it's often the case that you can't see a YouTube video, which is what Sarah intends to show in the session, but we will have that link available in the presentation. We'll email you. So I'm sorry it's not a level playing field here, but that's the way it is. And Sarah, just clicking the next screen will bring up that YouTube, and you can press the play control at your end, Sarah. Oh, um, you may have given us a link that was private, Sarah. I don't know, but
Hmm.
it looks like it's not going to show for any of us. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is it possible, could I click on watch it on YouTube to see if we can go to YouTube specifically or?
You can try, but I can't guarantee.
Okay. Hmm. Okay. Doesn't look like that's going to work. Okay. Okay, no worries. Well, what we will do is we will include Robin's story as a link in the follow-up email, if that's okay, Sarah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on to the pre-screen. So the Learning Challenges pre-screen is meant to reveal issues in a learner's daily life or history that might be due to learning challenges. So things to consider when you're thinking about using the pre-screen is to ensure that you have a rapport before you administer the pre-screen. So you'll likely need to spend some time with the person before completing this in order to build trust. Otherwise, they may be uncomfortable answering the questions, possibly question your intentions, and it just won't result in helpful information to move forward because there are a lot of personal questions that are involved in the pre-screen. You want to inform the learner or the client of their rights as well. So be sure to let the person know that they can refuse answering any questions that they're not comfortable with, or they can request that it's not written down or included in any reports. So in terms of the pre-screen, and we will take a look at the actual PDF of each section of the pre-screen, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction of the components of the pre-screen. So if you have the Learning Challenges pre-screen, it is available to you in the handout section. So I will go to that in just a second. Actually, I'll move there now. Here it is here. So if you would like to download it, you're welcome to do that. Um, As mentioned at the beginning of the session, the pre-screen is part of the larger assessment of the Learning Challenges assessment tool, which is only available for use with the learning networks. However, it will give you information about whether your learner or client has learning challenges markers and may raise valuable discussion and possibly be a springboard to a potential referral into a program. So Section 1 is essentially contact information. So this section is for reference only. So you very likely have other forms with this information in it already. So if that's the case, you don't complete the content information section unless you really need it for your records. Section 2 is factors that suggest that the learner does not have learning challenges. So the learner may have enjoyed school or felt they did well. If the learner has several of those, then they likely don't have learning challenges. However, it is recommended that no matter what you hear in the opening section from your client or learner, that you continue with the full pre-screen. So I'm just going to go back just so you can see the different sections that I'm referencing. Section 3 is factors that need to be examined that are outside of learning. So these are medical or situational factors that may get in the way of learning. For example, if the learner has a high level of stress that has been mentioned before, then their learning difficulties may be due to that factor as opposed to learning challenges. So some of these issues may need to be addressed before or during their time in a literacy and basic skills class. Section 4 are factors that would suggest that they have learning challenges. So specific things such as difficulty shopping or taking the bus, and general things like they had to repeat a grade, they always had difficulties with reading and spelling, etc. And then the final section is the summary section. And again, we will take a look at these in detail. If the person has many specific and many general, that's when, okay, we need to take a look at this further and what supports this client or learner may need. For employment services, this could mean encouraging your client to enroll in an upgrading class. You may already know and refer to the service providers in your region. However, if you're not familiar with all of the service providers, you can connect with your local learning network, and you can find them by visiting www.learningnetworks.ca. For literacy practitioners, this means that you'll want to find out more information about how this learner processes language and what learning strategies may help. I had a question here, is it available in French? The pre-screen unfortunately is not available in French. That being said, that's something that I can take back and think about. Thank you, Sarah. I was just going to put that URL to the Learn Networks there, but I will make a note of that. Okay. So we were going to utilize a little bit of a role play activity here, but I think I'd much prefer just to walk you through the different components so that if there are questions that I can take you through it. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind popping up the pre-screen. Perfect, thank you. So as you'll notice, and please do keep the questions coming in the text chat, and I will hope to answer them or respond to them as we go through these different sections. So the first page of the pre-screening tool, as you can see, is just a lot of contact information and demographic information. So again, you can decide to use that or not, but odds are you'll be skipping that section and moving right to section number 1, which is factors that would suggest that the learner does not have learning challenges. So in general, how I position this is, think back to when you were quite young. I typically say grades kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 because that's primary literacy development years. And I ask, did you enjoy school? And what we're looking for here is certainly a yes or no answer, but they may then provide, depending on your relationship, they may provide more information. So did you enjoy school? Yes, it was great. Or no, many clients that I work with, no, I hated school. It was an awful time for me. But these first set of questions are really to talk about in those primary development years. So did you feel that you did well in school? So did you get good grades, or did you feel that you learned new material easily, that you were comfortable learning new skills? So this information is really important to just get a sense of their experience and their feelings about that experience when they were younger. Now the second little section there are currently. So today, do you like to read? Do you pick up a magazine? Do you read online? Can we just go back up a little bit, Sarah? So I'm still on the There we go. Do you like to write? So things like notes. Are you writing emails? Are you, whatever the case may be? And you may already know a little bit about this client or this learner, so you may be able to fill in the blanks there and kind of condition it based on what you know about the individual. But again, you're looking for, a yes, a no, some narrative comments there. And again, with math, budgeting, shopping, measuring, banking, those day-to-day things that they would need to do. So in this section, you really are focused on the skills that they're using on a daily basis. If you feel that you didn't do well in school or have difficulties in reading, writing, or math, then you want to know, did you miss a lot of school? Did you move around a lot when you were a child? Did you attend 4 or 5 different elementary schools? Were you sick for a long time? Were there periods of time where you were off school for weeks and weeks at a time, for example? So if that's the case, if they answer yes, do they believe that the lack of schooling is the reason for their difficulties? This may or may not be, but it's interesting to know that if they say, yeah, I moved around a lot and I was just always catching up, I don't feel like, I wouldn't be able to learn necessarily. I just feel like I wasn't given the opportunity. But quite frankly, more often than not, even if they've missed a lot of school, they really feel that they are having challenges processing language. So that's where you can document the yes or no. So whether or not you check or X or put a Y or an N, however you decide to do that, you really want to get a sense out of the 9 questions, how many were check marks. And if there are lots of check marks, 4 plus for example, it's likely the learner does not have learning challenges. But again, it's recommended that you go through the entire pre-screen. Section 2 are those factors that need to be examined before the assessment is completed. So, for example, the first one is, do you have a history of vision problems? So I typically reword this and say, do you have any vision problems? Do you wear glasses? So that you can say, well, if they have vision problems, yep, they wear glasses. Or if not, then this may need to be looked at. So you can see there that the script does take you through all of those different questions and that you can identify whether action is needed. So if they say, for example, that they're they do wear glasses, but maybe their prescription is out of date, then that's something that really needs to be looked at, maybe in partnership with their case manager at maybe Ontario Works or something like that. But that needs to be looked at if they're going to be in a program, of course, or if they're going to be taking advantage of employment workshops, etc. Secondly, there, do you have a history of hearing problems? So if yes, you want to understand what the nature of that is. Do they wear a hearing aid? Does your hearing affect you when you're learning? And so that's really a key question, because that's going to impact whether or not action is needed before kind of a formal referral process is really beneficial. Next is, do you have any other serious health problems? Things that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, maybe diabetes, maybe MS, these kind of chronic issues. And if yes, does it affect you when you're learning? You're going to see that that is really the keystone of the pre-screen in this section, that we want to understand what could have an impact on their success, that are maybe the outside factors that maybe have to be dealt with to some degree. So if health issues are affecting learning, we may need to look into solutions before continuing. So you want to document whether you think that action might be needed there. Next one, if medication affects learning, you want to seek out information about, are you on medication that maybe makes you drowsy, that makes you uncomfortable, that you're not able to sit for long periods of time. These are all important issues for both employment practitioners as well as literacy practitioners. Next one down is rather sensitive. Have you ever had a drug or alcohol problem? And I condition that by saying, have you ever had a drug or alcohol problem that will affect you when you're learning? So they can choose to answer this or not, but it does kind of fill in a little bit of the gap so that you have a clear picture. And some people will say, you know what, yes, and I find that I have memory issues, and that'll have to be looked at. Next one down, do you suffer from any anxiety or depression? So this is obviously a key question as well, because it's going to affect them in all types of environments. And if yes, does it affect them when they're learning? Of course, here you want to make sure that you're looking at wraparound referrals, and that you're doing your due diligence. So if they are identifying that they have anxiety or depression, I would want to know if it's been diagnosed and if they have a mental health team that they're working with. And if not, then making sure that they do get those supports, so that if those issues are things that they haven't, maybe they're disclosing that for the first time, that there's some connection to supports there. Next question down, I also see that there's a comment about chronic pain. That would be very critical as well in terms of being able to sit for long periods of time or being comfortable in a class. So absolutely, that would have to be kind of managed, or the instructor would need to know that, or the workshop facilitator. And certainly that has implications for job placement as well. High level of stress in your life right now. So this can be dealt with in a number of ways, just getting some anecdotal kind of reactions from the client or learner. I typically like to use a scaling mechanism. So, think of, put it on a scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 10. 0, I'm on a beach somewhere, on vacation. 10, I'm in crisis mode and really can't handle any more stress at this point. So you really want to get an idea as to where their stress level is, because that will certainly have an impact on programming, and will certainly have an impact on how they're able to learn and how that's going to affect them in a learning environment. Okay, so we have a comment from Tanya. It's currently working with a youth group that appears that 9 out of 10 identify as having high anxieties, and that's actually what we're seeing statistically in the research right now, is that specifically with youth, that there are lots of mental health issues, and in particular anxiety. And how as a field are we dealing with that? That's probably the content of maybe another complete webinar, but certainly something that we should kind of keep in our mind's eye, Sarah, as we talk about different topics for the online community practice. And then the last section there is, have you ever been diagnosed with a disability, either physical or psychological? And so if things that maybe haven't come up yet might come up here, and if they've ever used disability services. And so sometimes you may get information that would point to more of an intellectual disability. And so we know that this tool isn't necessarily the most appropriate for that group, but it's very good information so that you can connect them with the supports that they need. So you can see how section 2 doesn't really deal with learning challenges at all, but rather those peripheral factors. It looks like Tanya has lost audio, so hopefully you can go to your audio check and come back in. But can I get a show of hands for those that still can hear me and hear me well, just to make sure that I haven't gone off track? Okay, good. Thank you very much. The next section are factors, very specific factors that may suggest that the learner has learning challenges. So here's where we get into really the guts of this pre-screen. That's very important. So they may have difficulties shopping, for example. So do you have any difficulty estimating cost, counting change when you're at the store? Any difficulty handling money, doing their banking, using public transportation, so taking the bus to get around the city, for example? Any difficulty keeping track of time, housekeeping, using the phone, cooking, remembering things. Now, the other thing about memory is if they say, yes, I do have difficulty remembering things, you may want to ask whether it's primarily long or short term. So are you forgetting things like appointments that you have the next day for short term? Or is it more longer term things like people's birthday, people's names that you've known for a long time? Reading and writing for pleasure or social purposes. So you could say things like, do you kind of avoid daily reading tasks, very similar to what you dealt with in the first section. So getting their sense of whether or not they're partaking in those types of pleasure activities around literacy is a good idea. And finally, making or keeping friends. So you want to kind of identify how many check marks there out of 10, and then we'll move to the general category. Now, in terms of the general category, the first 3 questions on here are incredibly important and linked. So I can tell you that if a client or learner answers yes to the first 3 questions in this general list, you might want to make a note of this, that odds are they do have learning challenges, and that that this is going to need to be addressed in some way. So, do you have great difficulties learning new skills in specific areas, for example, with reading and writing? If they say yes to that and say that they've always had those difficulties and that they do feel that they have great strengths or talents in some areas and a great amount of difficulty in others, so looking at that disparity between the strengths and the challenges, if those three are yes, then that's a pretty key indicator that the person that you're working with likely has learning challenges. If they've ever repeated or skipped a grade, so you want to ask, did you ever have to repeat a grade in school? And if that's the case, did you have to then skip a grade later on? So you want to get an idea of kind of their history in particularly elementary. You're not really concerned about high school here. We're looking at grades kind of 1 through 6 primarily. Did you ever receive extra help in school? Maybe they access resource class or a resource teacher. Maybe they had one-to-one tutoring. Maybe they accessed special education. Maybe they had an individualized education plan or an IEP. All of those are helpful to note there. Next one, did you work hard in school but still found you had difficulties understanding the material or doing well? So this is also a really important one because it speaks to the fact that it wasn't just kind of that lack of effort, but that they really gave it a good go and still found that they had challenge areas. Do other members of your family or any members of your family have difficulties with reading, writing, or math, or have been diagnosed with a learning disability? So because we know that there are congenital links, we know that if they identify that maybe their parent or their sibling or their son or daughter has been diagnosed with a learning disability, that the likelihood of them also having learning disability does increase. So that's why we ask that question. Have you ever been formally assessed for a learning disability? In which case you want to know kind of what grade, what happened, what were the results if they have any. If English is not their first language, you want to know if they had any difficulty learning to read and write in their native language, because that can lead to whether or not they have a learning disability, obviously, in their native language. But if they didn't and they have a lot of other markers, is it a learning disability in their second language? So not to say that you'll be able to kind of glean this from one question, but it does start the conversation. And then we get into a little bit of employment history. Have you had many jobs for short periods of time? Did you leave any jobs because of learning difficulties in reading, writing, and math? Or have you avoided a job because of the literacy requirements? So those are the general questions. There's 12 of them, and you want to get a sense as to how many they answered yes to. So if the learner or client answered yes to more than 3 or 4 in the specific list and more than 5 or 6 in the general list, then in normal circumstances with this pre-screen, you would continue with the assessment. So for you as a practitioner, you want to get a sense as to, okay, what did I learn from this pre-screen? And what would be my next steps? So as we talked about, in terms of employment services, you really want to see if a referral to an upgrading program is appropriate for that client because they do need further support around their learning. And for a literacy and basic skills practitioner, this is where you need to start really dissecting what you see in terms of processing challenges that we'll talk about in a minute, and try to identify some strategies that make sense. Vanessa says, I don't believe they hold students back in school anymore. They've said holding a student back, a grade, etc., is worse on their emotional well-being. I believe that's still true for the Catholic board, but boards, but I believe the district school boards still may hold back if needed. Okay, so yeah, Jennifer is saying that they don't hold students back anymore. Certainly in high school they would, but we're really looking at primary literacy development years, so in elementary. The other thing is that may be the case for youth that are coming into your programs that just obviously exited the school system, but many of our clients are in their late 20s, early 30s, 40s, 50s, so they would of course may have repeated grades. So just looking for kind of any other comments with regards to the pre-screen. I did go through those sections rather quickly, but I wanted to make sure that you could see the script on screen. So are there any comments about whether or not this might be useful to your work? I'm going to leave that out there as a comment. Um, okay, thank you, Roger. Some clients coming from Mexico have great difficulties. Yeah, absolutely, in terms of second language. So, Susan, you had asked, it's only available to the networks. I have made this available, the pre-screen available to for this webinar series. So you are more than welcome to use the pre-screen as we've gone over it and you've had some training in the use of this tool and essentially what it can do for you. The full Learning Challenges assessment this is only one piece of the Learning Challenges assessment, and that full assessment is only for use by the Learning Networks of Ontario. So just to be clear about that. Thank you, Luann. Looks like you can use that tool right away, so that's wonderful. I do encourage you with the pre-screen. It does take a little bit of time. This is something that is kind of like the back of my hand these days, but it will take a few tries. You may want to use it in a staff meeting, for example, and try it out on your colleagues. I do have a couple of scripts that I have prepared that if you were to attempt the pre-screen in a more of a training environment, that I have a script that could be potential answers. I think I have 2 different versions. So if that's something that would be helpful, I will send it to Sarah to be included in your resources so that in a training situation, you could then try it back and forth and have some typical answers so that you're not just kind of answering off the cuff. Okay, I'm just pausing to make sure that okay, great. Sherry says that you're already asking some of these questions, so that's great. You may find that using it in this way kind of gives you a clearer picture, I hope. Um, okay, yes, Luann, I will certainly provide those training answers for the pre-screen. And yes, I'm glad. It may help to kind of formalize your process around learning challenges and just allow you to have more of a formal strategy around this. So that's great. Okay, so I will move on. I am cognizant of time. I do want to get us completed by 11:30. So if there continue to be questions about the pre-screen, or certainly if you are reviewing them after the session and have questions that we can address in next week's session, please do let me know. Pop me an email so that I can prepare for that ahead of time. So I do want to look at, oh, excuse me, moving ahead. Processing challenges. Let's dissect these a little bit and let's take a look at what these look like in comparison to each other. So, excuse me. So here, I won't be necessarily going to the handout, but there is a processing challenges definitions and markers document that you can download and also that you can use afterwards as reference, and you'll have that in the email. So the LBS field, sorry, my phone is going off. I thought I unplugged it. The LBS field typically looks at learning challenges using 3 processing challenge areas, so visual, auditory, and organizational. So this is different from the medical terms. As they diagnose the subject area, we try in the literacy field to identify challenges in processing that could affect many subject areas. For example, a learner could have a visual processing challenge that affects reading, writing, and math. Discussing it in this way makes it easier to be very specific in terms of the challenge they are facing and find specific and individualized strategies that could help them cope with the challenges and reach their goals. There are also other factors such as attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, personal characteristics, and social characteristics that can coincide with learning challenges. There is the handout. So just so that you know that it is available to you here if you'd like to take a look at it, and it will also be made available after the session. Let's take a look at visual processing challenges. So they can hinder a learner's ability to make sense of information taken in through the eyes. These are not visual disorders. This is not an eye problem or a medical issue in terms of vision. Difficulties can be seen in the learner's ability to discriminate between different letters or words, following text while reading, and difficulty remembering the look of letters or words, so visual memory. Visual processing challenges can affect a learner's reading, writing, and mathematic ability. So in terms of the markers, these learners have a physical reaction to print typically. So they may get headaches or get tired or red eyes. They have a lot of difficulty tracking text. So the text may move or shake on the page. They may see it slide off the page. They may see rivers of white. So these can all be very jarring, and certainly it'll be very clear to see if someone is referencing that that's what they're seeing, that is very specific to visual processing challenges. They over rely on sounding out words, so they have a poor sight word memory. So they may sound out the same word several times when they're reading a document. Reading substitutions are visually similar. So for example, they may say horse instead of house, which is obviously going to interrupt the meaning or the context of what they're reading. Spellings are usually a phonetic alternative to the correct spelling. So you can typically tell what they're trying to write, but it's just not the correct spelling. They mix upper and lowercase letters inappropriately, like in the middle of a word. They may spell the same word differently in the same document. They confuse similar numbers or transpose numbers, so they put them in the wrong order. They have difficulty copying information, and they may have difficulty with left-right and working in columns, specifically with math. So I'm going to take a look at a few examples. Okay, I'm just going to use my pointer. So for example, we have here, "A goals" should be "my goals." So it's a word substitution and a grammatical error. "Stopping" here should be stopping with two P's, which is a rule-based error. "Can do it" here should be "can't do it." So a grammatical error, being able to identify errors and self-correcting. We have "ones" should be "once," which is kind of a miscue. They're just spelling a different word. Here we have "so I will finish school and then smoking" is a sentence fragment. I think, I can't tell, but it looks like the F might be an uppercase there, might be a lowercase. And then "finish," they left out the I, but is otherwise phonetic. So as you're reading this, you can tell what they're saying. You can follow along, but there are those kind of specific challenges. And finally, "smoking" should be "stop smoking." So there's words being left out there. Okay. So those are just some examples of how it looks in terms of a writing sample. Auditory processing challenges affect how oral information is interpreted or processed by the brain. So this can interfere with speech and language acquisition. It can affect all areas of learning, especially reading and spelling. So an auditory processing challenge is not a hearing problem, just like a visual processing challenge is not an eye problem, but rather a difficulty perceiving oral information. So a learner may be unable to recognize or isolate individual parts of speech or remember spoken language. So they have difficulty retaining and recalling oral information. We heard about that. Have difficulty explaining themselves to others. Dislike or avoid reading, especially out loud. Have a lot of difficulty or are unable to use phonics to sound out words. So using the sounds of those letters. They may reverse or transpose letters. So they may flip them upside down, side by side, or switch them all together. They have difficulty understanding a text on the first reading, so they may need a lot of repetition. They don't use phonetic alternatives when spelling, so the spellings seem quite bizarre. You can't really tell what they're saying. They add or miss letters, or they're in the wrong order. And they have difficulty processing numbers correctly. And they may say a number backwards or may transpose the numbers when doing oral drills. So you can see when discussing those markers how they differ from those visual processing challenges. So an example, back to my pointer here, let's just see if it's still here. Oh, it is. Okay, good. For example, in the word "said," you can see the different spelling. Now this is a rule-based error, right? So it's interesting because rule-based errors are typically more of a visual processing challenges, but taken with the other errors that we see that I'm going to walk you through, you can tell that there are auditory difficulties, and that becomes quite clear. For example, you see just below it the word "stiff" and how they dealt with that. STAICF. So it is quite bizarre. If you saw that in a sentence, you wouldn't be able to identify that it was the word stiff. There are substitutions in terms of the sounds and additions, right? So they've added that C and we're not quite sure why. Next one, this one at the top here, that should be number. So instead, UNMBEF. So they've transposed, they've substituted sounds, and again, it's not a phonetic alternative. Then we have quit here. So you can see that they've transposed words and they've added that E. Excuse me, they've transposed letters. We also have reward here. So they've added that A. Listen, they've not put in the silent E. We also have, this one is kitchen. So again, not a phonetic alternative, lots of things going on here. Same with knowledge, lots of omissions, things that are not in there. You can't really tell what the word is supposed to be from that spelling. And finally, awesome. You have awesome here, right? So you can see the substitutions there, and program, right? The addition and the transpositions here. Okay. So Tanya had asked, are there tools available to identify what type of a learner a person may be? Absolutely. So lots of learning style inventories are available. I included one in my Learning Challenges assessment tool. I have it in front of me. If you'll indulge me for a moment. I can't remember exactly where I got it, but I believe it was highly used, I want to say maybe in CABS, so the Common Assessment of Basic Skills. So I'm going to make a note of that to make sure that one of those inventories are included. So learning style inventory. I just want to make sure, Tanya, is that what you're asking? Okay, great. So I'll make sure that I do that. Okay, so that is visual processing challenges and auditory processing challenges, and kind of dissecting a little bit what those things look like. So you may be kind of wondering a little bit about that, looking at some of these markers, that many of them are quite similar, and that it might be difficult to distinguish between a visual and an auditory processing challenge. So this chart may help us try to start to dissect what the major differences are between visual and auditory processing challenges. So in reading, again, in visual processing challenges, there's that physical reaction to reading, whether that be headaches, tired, or red eyes. And with folks that have auditory processing challenges, this isn't typical. So again, there's a lot of difficulty tracking with folks with visual processing challenges, and there's not really, we don't see that with auditory processing challenges. With visual readers, they over-rely, visual processing readers challenges, they over-rely on sounding out the words because they don't have that sight word memory. So they continually have to decode familiar words. Whereas with auditory processing challenges, they have a lot of difficulty or unable to use phonics to decode those words. So they will likely recognize some sight words or over-rely on their sight words. In writing, spellings are likely a phonetic alternative to the correct spelling with visual processing challenges. But again, as we saw in the examples, in auditory processing challenges, the spellings are typically quite bizarre in that they're not those good phonetic alternatives. They mix upper and lowercase letters inappropriately, but the auditory folks typically don't. Visual processing challenges, they may spell the same word differently in the same document. With auditory processing challenges, they may do this, but it's more typical of a visual processing difficulty. And then finally with math, if you have a visual processing challenge, you might confuse similar numbers, have difficulty copying, or have difficulty with left and right orientation or working with columns. Whereas auditory processing challenges, you're going to have difficulties hearing numbers correctly, saying numbers backwards or may transpose numbers, and typically few difficulties with the left and right and with columns. Roger asked, which processing challenge is more common, visual or auditory? And so, Roger, I would very much say that there is much more evidence for auditory processing challenges. than visual processing challenges. And I'm not basing that on any kind of major research finding, but just that I've been working with this for many, many years. And if I were to put a number on it, I would say that 80 to 85% of all the clients that I've worked with primarily have auditory processing challenges. But there is that contingent that has visual processing challenges, and it is can be very overwhelming, as you can see from those major markers, and does require individualized strategy development. So the strategies that are going to work for people that have auditory processing challenges very likely won't work for those with visual processing challenges. And that's why it's so important to identify the strategies that may work. Okay, so Jean made a comment about looking at like filters as a kind of tool to assist with less blurring on the page. Absolutely, with learners or clients that have visual processing challenges, if using a soft color of paper typically helps kind of it helps the visual field accept the information. Typically, these learners have a lot of difficulty with the contrast between black print and white paper. It's too much of a contrast for how they are accepting the information. So using maybe a transparency over top of a document or coloring that paper is sometimes helpful. Other things that are helpful are making sure that the spacing is 1.3 to 1.5, that it's maybe a serif font so that it's easier for the eye to follow. And that it's at least 12-point font. So things like that in terms of clear writing actually really help. So Allison says, looking at this quickly, I had a student who fit auditory and reading but visual and spelling. Is that normal? That's actually not normal at all, Allison. Typically, what we say here at ABA, you typically live in one house or the other. Very rarely do you have feet in both, but what I typically recommend is that you look at that learner as a whole and try to identify if those markers are very specifically one in visual and one in auditory. And if that's the case, I'm happy to consult on that because that's quite unique and challenging. Jennifer, yes, the content of the next session next week is specifically on, okay, what do we do now? So it talks about suggestions and strategies, and it talks a lot about direct instruction, which is pretty critical for these learners. Yep, you're welcome. So moving on, this will be in your slide deck. If you need it to be larger, just maybe pop me an email and I can maybe pull it out as a separate handout, but hopefully you'll be able to see it in PDF form that's big enough that you can look at it and use it. So our third challenge area is organizational processing challenges. And they exist when an individual has difficulty managing time and space and organizing their day-to-day activities. So this is similar to when we talked about the diagnosis of a nonverbal learning disability. So the learner may show difficulties when receiving, integrating, remembering, and expressing information. As well, the learner may have gross and or fine motor difficulties. So they may have difficulty remembering things, difficulty performing under stress, following a schedule, prioritizing, organizing, have a lot of difficulty adjusting to change. Also, their writing may show poor organization. They may have difficulty with directions, have an awkward pencil grip. Their letters maybe are poorly formed, and they may appear clumsy or poorly coordinated. So although we typically see these markers off the page and in real life, I wanted to show you an example of what you might see in terms of a writing sample from someone that had organizational processing challenge. So what you see here are missing words. You see printing and cursive mixed together. There's really no organization or structure. Obviously, there's difficulty with use of margins or any kind of formatting in terms of a paragraph structure, and no full sentences. Okay, so just to kind of give you like a visual representation of what that might look like on the page. Okay. So I will take any questions with regards to those processing challenge areas. So whether that be auditory, visual, or organizational, if you have had clients Okay, Susan had mentioned, will the session be available afterward if we can't attend? All of the sessions as part of the online community of practice are recorded, Susan, and so they are available to you through that particular page on the Contact North website. Along with last year's sessions. So absolutely, they have been recorded and they will be recorded and they will be available to you with all of the handouts. So if you're not able to make next week's session and you want to listen in, then you can certainly do that. Okay, so keep those questions coming. If you do have questions about those specific challenge areas, I'm happy to address them. But I am going to move to my final section of slides, just around factors to consider. So it's very important to know that learners or clients with learning challenges need more time, straight up. They typically benefit from part-time studies over full-time studies, at least at the beginning, so that some of that strategy development can start to happen. And they may need formal testing. So psychoeducational assessment is specifically appropriate for clients that are looking at entering a post-secondary program. So whether that be at college or university, so that they can get the accommodations and services that they need to be successful. And so that's certainly something that is challenging in terms of fees and that kind of thing, but can be really, really beneficial in that type of environment. The Ontario Psychologists Association referral services do have listings of most psychologists in Ontario. They can make referral suggestions based on what is required. They can make free referrals, and I've put the 1-800 number there for you. The challenge, of course, and this is kind of where a lot of the learning challenges assessment work has come from, is that psychoeducational assessments can be very prohibitive. You know, a lot of the clients and learners we work with certainly don't have the means, and there really is no funding, Kim. To assist adult learners, unless they happen to be working with things like maybe WSIB or you know, other than that, it's quite challenging to find funding in order to do these assessments. Um, and they can be very beneficial, as I said, in terms of accessing accommodations and resources in post-secondary. But at the end of the day, sometimes psychoeducational assessments can also be challenging because they don't really give us a lot of information. It really depends on who is doing the assessment and what they're getting from it. So Susan says OW in our area has limited funding for assessments, as does bridging employment supports from CMHA. That's quite unique, Susan. I know that in the Niagara region in the past that was also available, but certainly in the Hamilton region and in most regions across the province, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, they just don't have access to those types of supports, and that's why a lot of work from the practitioner base is so important. So obviously, getting to know what kind of characteristics or markers are there, where in the community you can go for assistance. The Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario and of Canada, you can go on there and get information as well. And they do have local chapters sometimes, so it may be the case that in your region you have a local learning disability chapter that you could go to for support as well. So I encourage you to look into those things. But the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario is an incredible resource, obviously for research, for listings of characteristics and on articles or stories that could resonate with your learners or clients. So, okay, so I am seeing that that there has been practitioners that have accessed these services, so that's great. Okay. One of our learners has had his doctor make a referral for a psychoeducational assessment through OHIP. Well, that's interesting. I know that in the Hamilton area, because we have the learning challenges assessment available, some learners have accessed that to use for some documentation and assistance in terms of just understanding and appreciating their challenges more. But again, it isn't a formal diagnosis. So. People with learning challenges truly need specialized learning strategies to help them succeed and reach their goals. And at the end of the day, this is kind of the main thing that we need to really focus on. Literacy and basic skills programs certainly have the capacity to do this with support from the field and their colleagues. For those from Employment Services or Ontario Works, I encourage you to work closely with your literacy and basic skills service providers to ensure that your clients have the support they need to reach their education and employment goals, specifically around the learning disability factor or issue. For literacy practitioners here today, I do encourage you to attend the second part of the webinar series next week, where we'll be discussing specific strategy development. However, you are certainly all welcome to attend. It may be of specific use to those that are working in a workshop environment, for example, but it does focus very much on strategies that might be helpful in an upgrading or training situation. So if you think that you may benefit from that, I do encourage you to come back for sure. As Sarah had mentioned, an evaluation will be sent to you shortly following the webinar. Please do take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. And the resources, like we mentioned, will be shared and it will be available in that email as well. So I encourage you to comment if you have any comments or questions, either right now in the text chat. I will stay around. I have provided a little bit of time at the end of our session to address some questions or comments. However, if it's a comment or question that pops up in your head maybe after the session, you're more than welcome to email me or give me a call. And thank you so much for attending. I do look forward to part 2 next week. So I will open it up at this point for questions.
Just a reminder that if you'd like to use a microphone and you click the raised hand icon and you have a microphone, we'll try to enable it for you. Thanks. Sarah, Allison's mentioning that being a new practitioner, she's not as familiar with networks. I believe Sarah might be able to speak to this very knowledgeably. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there are 16 regional networks, regional literacy networks across the province, Allison. So in your region, you would have a learning network or a literacy network, we use them interchangeably, in your community that could direct you to all of the literacy and basic skills service providers. So yeah, that's what we mean by networks, and we all work together quite collaboratively across the province to make sure that communication is kind of spread provincially. Great. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Debbie, for that endorsement. And I do hope to see you back next week. Okay. So Jennifer, it does seem like you want to make a comment, which is great. So hopefully we can get you your microphone, and if not,
I've given you access to the microphone, Jennifer. Try clicking the microphone icon to the left of your name, and we'll see if we can hear you speaking. Go ahead. Unfortunately, I can see that you are trying to use it because it has turned green as it does when it's being activated, and it looks like your volume's all the way up. Oh, go ahead. Now we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Are you going to go ahead, Jennifer? We lost you again. If I'm not sure if you have done something different that's muting you. There, now we can hear you again. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay. Sarah, go ahead and answer other people's questions first, because I just wanted to touch base with you about another series of webinars that I'm going to be offering and ask you some questions. So.
Oh, Okay, great. So Sherry, I wanted to address that you had commented about the full assessment, and it's available through the network assessment services, and how can we access that assessment. So it will depend on your region, Sherry. So I would very much encourage you to pop me an email to let me know kind of where you are in the province, and I can let you know whether or not there is a network in your area that does currently offer that assessment. So we might have to have that discussion offline. Luann, I'm working with a learner who has not disclosed a specific learning challenge. He reads but does not know the alphabet completely, phonics or syllables. I'm thinking auditory. I'm struggling with finding the best method to guide him. Okay, so Luann, I would absolutely encourage you to come next week. I guess that's a shameful plug for the second webinar, but we will be talking about strategies that may be able to assist there. And I think that would be a useful session, sorry, for you, so that we can kind of talk about the case in a little bit more rigor. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to see if I've addressed all of the comments and questions. I believe I have at this point. If anyone has any other questions, I will stay on for a few extra minutes to make sure that we capture those. Otherwise, I'd like to wish everyone a good day. I know everyone's quite busy. You will hear from us, from Sarah, and she's also saying that she will save the text chat so that we can kind of look at it and make sure we didn't miss anything. But I wish you all a good week, and we'll see you next week. Okay, Roxanne. Yes, so I had said that in terms of the full assessment, the Learning Challenges assessment, um, it is networks can use it across the province. So it is a tool that was designed to be more of a centralized assessment tool. So some networks across the province are using it. So it really depends what region you're in. So I would encourage those that are interested in that full assessment tool to email me directly so that we can talk about maybe who might provide that service in your area. And Diana, I'm hoping, Sarah, that you can maybe throw the link to register for next week's session in the text chat, because it looks like some might be looking for that.
Actually, what I'm going to do is send out that link as well in the email that everyone will receive after the webinar and after Sarah has passed on all the resources that she's collecting for all of you. Thank you.
Great. Roxanne, I don't believe that there is anyone administering the Learning Challenges assessment in the northern networks, but that may be something that I could look into to see who is offering that. But yeah, I don't believe it is up in that area. So I'll seek out that information and share it at next week's webinar so that you'll have an understanding of which regions might have access to the full assessment tool.
If anyone's wondering how to exit from this session, just go to the upper right-hand area of your screen and you will see an exit link there. So thank you so much for all of your efforts to attend today. We're glad to have you and hope to see you next week. Thanks so much. Sarah, I think I will stop the recording with your permission.
Great. I just wanted to react to Sherry's comment so that the Learning Network administers the assessment for us. In fact, yes, if you have a network that is offering centralized assessment and that does assessment and referral into programs, they may also be using the Learning Challenges assessment as one of those tools. So yes, the network would do the assessment for you and you would receive the report. The unfortunate thing is I don't believe that it is being used quite heavily because all networks are different. So I believe, and I'll certainly check on this for next week, that the Learning Challenges assessment is available, of course, in Hamilton, in the Niagara region, and possibly in Kitchener-Waterloo area. But like I said, I will go to my colleagues across the province and seek that information out so that I can inform everyone next week.
Okay, if I pause the recording now, Sarah?
Yes, that sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.